Jake had never been one to believe in the strange or the supernatural. His life was grounded in reality. He was a single dad, struggling to make ends meet, raising his daughter on his own. Every day felt like a battle just to keep things together. The small house he lived in, tucked away on the edge of town, was cold and worn from years of wear and tear. The walls creaked with every gust of wind, and the floorboards groaned underfoot. Despite all this, it was home. It was late one evening when the knock came. Jake had just finished tucking his daughter into bed and was about to settle in on the couch, with a cold beer, ready to unwind from a long day of work. The house was quiet, the kind of stillness that made the smallest sounds seem louder than they were. Then, a knock on the door. Jake froze, staring at the door, unsure of what to make of it. It was already past midnight. Who would be visiting at this hour? He walked cautiously toward the door, his heartbeat quickening with every step. He wasn't expecting anyone, and the idea of someone out there, in the dark, didn't sit right with him. But curiosity got the better of him. When he opened the door, there she was, a woman, standing in the cold, dark night. She looked out of place. Her clothes were old-fashioned, a faded gray coat that didn't seem to match the time or the place. Her face was pale, almost a pale, and her long, silver hair fell loosely around her shoulders. The strange thing was, her eyes, those eyes, they glowed. Not in a way that was bright or obvious, but in a faint, eerie shimmer that made Jake feel uneasy. She wasn't young, but she wasn't old either. Her presence was calm but somehow unsettling, like she wasn't quite human. She looked at Jake with an intensity that made him feel like she could see straight through him. "Please," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I need somewhere to stay for the night." Jake hesitated. His instincts told him to shut the door and call the police, but something about her words, the look in her eyes, kept him from doing it. Maybe it was the fact that she seemed so vulnerable standing there in the cold. Maybe it was the sheer oddness of the situation. But something inside him softened, and he stepped aside. "All right," Jake said, his voice uncertain. "Come in. I can't leave you out there." The woman nodded slightly and stepped into the warmth of the house, her footsteps almost silent. She didn't seem cold, even though the night outside was freezing. Her gaze shifted around the room, taking in everything with an almost calculated interest. But she said nothing. She simply followed Jake into the living room. Jake closed the door behind her, still processing what had just happened. He wasn't sure why he had let her in. She was a stranger, an odd one at that, but now she was inside, and he couldn't just send her away. "Thank you," she said quietly, sitting down on the couch without being asked. Jake stood in the doorway for a moment, unsure of what to do next. His mind raced with questions, but the silence of the room seemed to press in on him. Why had she come here? What did she really want? And why did it feel like this strange encounter was only the beginning of something much larger than he could understand? As the woman sat in the living room, the night felt colder, and the house seemed to grow quieter. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was not right, that this mysterious visitor was not someone he should be helping. But he had already let her in, and now he would have to live with the consequences. Jake sat in the dimly lit living room, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The woman, Zira, sat quietly across from him, her strange eyes never leaving him. Her silence felt heavier than the darkness around them. She didn't ask for anything, didn't demand attention, but her presence was undeniable. Jake had offered her a place to stay, and now here she was, an enigma, sitting in his home like she belonged. He glanced at the clock past 1 in the morning and realized just how bizarre the situation had become. The strange woman, her glowing eyes, and the odd way she carried herself, it didn't sit right. He'd seen his fair share of odd people in his time, but this was different. There was something otherworldly about her, something that didn't belong. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, trying to figure out what to say. "So, where are you from?" Jake asked, his voice breaking the silence. He didn't expect much, but her response was something he couldn't ignore. "I am not from here," Zira replied softly, her gaze never wavering. Her words were simple, but had a weight to them that made Jake's skin prickle. She spoke as if Earth was a foreign concept to her, something she was still learning about, like a child trying to understand an entirely new world. But her voice, it didn't sound like someone lost or scared. It was calm, even soothing, in a way that made Jake feel like he was the one who was out of place. "What do you mean? Where exactly are you from?" Jake asked again, his curiosity edging into his voice. Zira's lips parted as if she was choosing her words carefully, but after a long pause, she simply shook her head. "It is not a place you would understand." Jake's brow furrowed, more questions popping into his head with each word she spoke. What was she talking about? How could she be so certain he wouldn't understand? Still, he didn't push. There was something about the way she said it that made him feel like he wasn't supposed to know more, that there were things too complicated or dangerous to explain. He looked at her, taking in the oddness of her appearance once again. The glowing eyes, the silver hair, she looked like someone who belonged in a different time or place. Something about her was ancient, yet fresh, like she didn't quite fit into the world around her. And yet, there was a kind of sadness in her eyes that made Jake wonder what had happened to her. What had brought her here? The silence between them stretched on, thick and uncomfortable. Jake had learned to trust his instincts over the years, and right now, something didn't feel right. His gut was telling him that letting her stay had been a mistake. But what could he do now? She was here. She was inside his home, and there was no easy way to send her away. "So, what are you really here for?" Jake asked, his voice quieter this time, almost to himself. He wasn't sure if he was asking her or trying to convince himself to get to the truth. Zira finally spoke, her voice carrying a trace of melancholy. "I am searching for something I have lost, and I need your help." Jake's heart skipped a beat. Lost? Help? His mind raced with the possibilities, none of them good. He didn't know what kind of trouble this woman was mixed up in, but he was beginning to feel that whatever it was far beyond his ability to fix. Still, something about her words tugged at him. He couldn't explain it, but he felt the need to help her. But how? And at what cost? Before he could ask another question, Zira stood up suddenly, her movements graceful and almost fluid. She walked toward the window, staring out into the dark night, her silhouette glowing faintly in the moonlight. "I've been here too long," she whispered, almost to herself. "I must leave before it's too late." Jake stood too, his heart racing. "Leave? What do you mean by that?" But before she could respond, the door slammed open with a sudden gust of cold wind. Jake spun around, panic creeping into his chest. Standing there in the doorway were figures he couldn't quite make out, dark shadows, looming just beyond the light. Something told him he wasn't ready for what was about to happen, and deep down, he knew this night would change everything. Jake's heart raced as the cold air swept into the room, making the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The door had slammed open as if by force, but no one had touched it. He took a step forward, eyes darting to Zira, who had frozen in place, her body tense as if she were sensing something he couldn't. Her glowing eyes flickered with a mixture of worry and determination. Without a word, she moved toward the door, her movements swift and silent. Jake stood rooted to the spot, unsure of what to do. The shadows outside the door remained, their outlines unclear but undeniably present. There was no sound, no footsteps, no voices, just an eerie stillness that pressed down on him like a heavy weight. Zira reached out, her fingers brushing the door frame, and the door closed gently, as though nothing had happened. She turned to Jake, her face pale under the dim light, her expression unreadable. "Who were they?" Jake asked, his voice barely a whisper. His mind raced with questions, but none seemed to make sense. There was no way he could have imagined that, right? Zira didn't answer right away. She just stood there, staring at the door as if trying to make sense of what had just happened. Then, slowly, she turned to him, her eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't quite place. Fear, maybe, or something deeper, something old. "They are from my past," she said quietly, her voice strained. "They've come for me." Jake's stomach tightened. Her words were heavy, laced with something dark, but he couldn't bring himself to ask more. It felt like he wasn't supposed to know, like asking would only pull him deeper into something he wasn't ready for. But the truth was, he was already too deep. She was already here, and now whatever was coming, he was part of it. "They won't stop," Zira continued, her voice shaky. "They'll keep coming until they find me." Jake swallowed hard, his instinct screaming at him to get out, to call for help. But there was nowhere to run. Not now. Zira was right. Whatever she was mixed up in, it had followed her here. And now, he had no choice but to be a part of it. "Why are they after you?" Jake finally asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. Zira looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. I was sent here to find something powerful." Her voice faltered, as if she wasn't sure how much to reveal, how much she could trust him with. "But they'll stop at nothing to keep me from completing my mission. And if they find me, they won't just hurt me. They'll hurt everyone I care about." Jake's mind reeled. This was bigger than he could have imagined. The woman who had appeared on his doorstep, the one he had invited into his home, wasn't just some lost soul. She was on the run from something or someone dangerous. And now, somehow, he had gotten involved. His life had just taken a sharp turn into a world that didn't make sense. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "What can I do? How can I help?" Zira's gaze flicked to him, a small, weary smile tugging at her lips. "I don't know if there's much you can do, but being here with me. You've already made a choice. You're already a part of this, whether you want to be or not." Jake opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, a loud thud echoed from outside, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate. Someone or something was coming. The moment had arrived. Zira stepped back from the door, her face now hardening with resolve. "Stay here," she commanded, her voice steady. "Whatever happens, don't open this door. Do you understand?" Jake nodded, though a wave of panic surged through him. He didn't know what to expect, but he could feel the air in the room shift, the tension thickening with every passing second. Zira's hands moved swiftly, pulling something from beneath her coat. It was a device strange and metallic, with symbols that Jake couldn't begin to understand. She held it up, her fingers working with practiced speed to activate it. The air around them seemed to hum, a low, vibrating sound that only added to the strange, unearthly atmosphere. Jake didn't dare speak, his eyes locked on Zira, who was now preparing for whatever was coming. He wasn't sure if he was scared, angry, or simply confused, but there was no turning back now. Whatever choice he had made in letting her stay, there was no undoing it. The night was about to change everything. The room seemed to hold its breath. The vibrations from the device in Zira's hands filled the space, sending an electric hum through the air. Jake's mind raced as he watched her work, his heart pounding in his chest. His hands were clammy, and for the first time in years, he felt completely out of control. The footsteps outside grew louder, echoing in the hallway, drawing closer. They weren't just ordinary footsteps. There was something deliberate about them, something predatory. Jake's instinct screamed at him to run, to get his daughter, to get out of there before whatever was out there reached them. But Zira was already taking control. She moved with purpose, her eyes focused on the device in her hands, as if it were the key to everything. Jake opened his mouth to speak, but Zira's sharp gaze cut him off. "Don't say a word," she said, her voice low and urgent. "If they hear you, we're both finished." He froze, feeling his breath catch in his throat. Her words didn't just chill him. They rooted him to the spot. She wasn't just scared, she was terrified. And that fear was more contagious than he could have imagined. The footsteps outside stopped. Just outside the door, silence. It felt like hours, though it was only seconds. Jake could barely move, his eyes flicking between the door and Zira, who now stood perfectly still, her device glowing faintly in her hands. There was a tense, silent communication between them, an unspoken understanding that Jake was to deepen this now, to back out. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. Then the door handle rattled. A low, guttural growl followed, sending a chill down Jake's spine. The door creaked under pressure, but it didn't open. They were testing it. They were testing her. Jake felt a strange pull in his chest, something telling him that Zira wasn't just hiding from whatever was out there. She was preparing for it. "Who are they?" Jake finally managed to ask, his voice barely a whisper. The question felt ridiculous at that point, but he had to ask. There was no going back now. Zira's eyes narrowed, and her grip tightened around the device. "My people, well, what's left of them. They're not the ones you should be worried about." She glanced at the door, her expression darkening. "They've sent something else, something much worse." The door rattled again, this time with more force. Jake could feel the vibrations through the floorboards. His mind spun with the possibilities. He didn't know if he could handle this, if he could handle her, but somehow, he knew he had no choice. There was another growl, sharper this time. The door trembled under the weight of it, and Jake could hear the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against wood. Whatever was on the other side wasn't human. Zira stepped forward, her body tense, every muscle coiled like a spring. "They're coming," she said, more to herself than to Jake. She raised the device, and a strange, pulsating light began to emanate from it. The air around them seemed to crackle, like static electricity before a storm. Jake swallowed hard. His heart raced. The door shook again, but this time, it wasn't just the door. The entire house felt like it was vibrating under the pressure. He could see Zira's hands shaking now, her usual composure slipping. This was the moment. He could feel it. Everything in his body screamed for him to run, but he couldn't move. "Zira, what are you doing?" Jake asked, his voice rising with panic. Zira's eyes met his, her face tight with concentration. "I'm doing what I have to. They've tracked me here, but I have one chance to stop them. I need you to trust me." Her words were simple, but they carried an unspoken weight, a weight that Jake couldn't ignore. Jake nodded, though his body screamed in protest. What could he do? He wasn't some hero. He was just a dad, trying to protect his daughter. But something about Zira, something in her desperate plea, made him realize that he couldn't just turn away. This wasn't just her fight anymore. The door finally gave way. With a sudden, violent crash, it burst open, and Jake's eyes widened as figures stepped into the room, tall, dark silhouettes with glowing eyes and jagged armor. Their movements were swift, inhuman. They stepped into the room, surrounding Zira and Jake, closing in like a predator cornering its prey. But Zira didn't flinch. She stood tall, holding the device high, its light now blindingly bright. There was a brief moment of silence, a stillness before the storm. Then, with a snap of her wrist, the device activated, and a blast of energy erupted from it, illuminating the room in a flash of white light. Jake didn't know what he was seeing. He barely had time to register the energy swirling around TH. The silence that followed the blast was deafening. Jake's ears rang, his vision blurred from the sudden explosion of light. He blinked rapidly, trying to focus, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The room was dim again, the air thick with an electric charge that still hummed in the background. His heart pounded, and for a brief moment, he thought he might be dreaming, but it was real. The figures that had entered the room moments before were gone, wiped out by the intense surge of energy. He could feel the remnants of the blast crackling in the air, the aftershocks still vibrating through the walls. He turned to Zira, who stood motionless in the center of the room, her face pale, her breath shallow. The device in her hand was no longer glowing, its power seemingly drained in one explosive wave. Jake took a step toward her, his legs shaky, unsure of what to say. His mind raced, trying to process everything that had just happened. "What the hell was that?" he managed to say, his voice rough from the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. Zira's eyes flicked toward him, her expression blank, as if she hadn't fully recovered from what she had just done. "That," she said softly, "was the only thing that could stop them." Jake's confusion deepened. "Stop who?" "Those things." His voice was tight, his words tumbling out in a rush. Zira nodded slowly, her gaze distant as if she were looking beyond the walls, beyond everything they had just endured. "They're not just after me. They're after the device, and they'll keep coming, no matter what I do. It's too dangerous to be in the wrong hands." Jake frowned. "But what is it? What does it do?" Her eyes finally met his, and for the first time, Jake saw the weight of her fear. "It's a key," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A key to something that can change everything. But it's not meant for humans. It's not meant for anyone who doesn't understand how to wield it." Jake felt a chill crawl up his spine. "So what does that mean for me?" he asked, already knowing the answer but afraid to hear it. Zira looked at him with sadness in her eyes, her face reflecting the exhaustion of someone who had carried a burden far too long. "It means you're involved now, whether you want to be or not. I didn't want to drag you into this, but by letting me stay here, you've made your choice. They know where I am now. They know you're connected to me." The words hung in the air like an unspoken truth, a truth that Jake couldn't escape. He had let her in, and now whatever dangerous game she was caught up in had become his own. There was no going back. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady his thoughts. So what now? What do we do? Zira closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. When she opened them again, they seemed even more determined, like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders, replaced by something far more dangerous. Now, she said, we find a way to make sure the key never falls into the wrong hands, and we make sure those things out there never find it. If they do, they'll use it to destroy everything we've fought for. And if that happens, she paused, her voice cold, nothing will be left. Jake's stomach turned at the thought, but something inside him stirred. He didn't want to be a part of this war. He didn't want to fight aliens or deal with strange, life-changing devices. But Zira was right, he was already into deep. And the thought of losing his daughter, of losing everything he cared about, pushed him forward. Then let's finish this, Jake said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions brewing inside him. He wasn't sure how, or if, they could stop whatever was coming. But he knew one thing. He wasn't about to let Zira fight alone. Not after everything they had already been through. Zira gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. Thank you, she whispered, the gratitude in her voice almost making him regret ever questioning this strange, dangerous path they were on. And just as quickly as it had all started, they were off again on the run, with no place safe. But this time, they had each other, and whatever came next, they would face it together. The hours that followed felt like an endless blur, each moment more intense than the last. Jake had barely processed what had happened before Zira was already preparing to move, her movements quick and efficient. It was clear that the explosion of energy had not only damaged their immediate surroundings, it had also attracted more attention. The house, once a place of calm, now felt like a beacon for whatever forces were chasing them. Are you sure about this? Jake asked, his voice filled with unease. You said they'll keep coming. How can we stop them? Zira didn't look up from the device in her hands as she carefully placed it back into a concealed compartment inside her coat. We can't stop them for good, she replied, her voice steady but tinged with exhaustion. But we can slow them down. I've already weakened their link to me, but it won't hold forever. They'll find another way in. Jake's mind raced, but he didn't have time for more questions. He glanced at the window, the streetlights flickering outside. His daughter, Lily, was still in her room, blissfully unaware of the chaos unfolding just beyond the walls of their home. His protective instincts kicked in. He couldn't let this danger reach her. You need to get out of here, Jake said firmly, his hand shaking as he reached for the door. Take the device and go. I'll keep them distracted. Zira stopped and turned toward him, her gaze piercing. You don't understand. They're not here just for the device, Jake. They're here for me and for what's inside me. Her voice was softer now, almost sorrowful. I carry the last piece of what could save my people. But if they get their hands on me, Jake's stomach clenched as he processed her words. You mean, if they catch you, they'll use you? He asked, horrified by the thought. You're their weapon? Zira nodded slowly, the weight of her burden settling between them like a dark cloud. Yes, but the power inside me is unstable. I've kept it hidden for so long, but every time I use it, the connection becomes stronger, more dangerous. Jake's mind was spinning. His world had shifted from the ordinary struggles of a single dad to a bizarre, high-stakes fight for survival. Everything he knew felt like it was being torn apart. Still, there was no turning back. What do we do now? He asked, his voice hoarse. Zira looked at him, her eyes hard but filled with an emotion that seemed almost like relief. We fight. We keep moving, keep the key safe. If we're lucky, we might be able to get to a place where they can't follow. Jake's eyes narrowed as he understood. They weren't just running anymore, they were on the offensive. Zira wasn't just trying to escape. She was going to take the fight to them. Where do we go? He asked, steeling himself for whatever was coming next. Zira's lips curved into a faint smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. We find a place they won't expect, and we make them regret ever coming after me. As the sound of footsteps echoed faintly in the distance, Jake knew one thing for certain. He wasn't alone in this fight anymore. He had crossed a line, and now he would stand by her side, no matter the cost. The night had only just begun, and the stakes were higher than he could have imagined. But together, they would face it. The sun had long set, and the streets outside were quiet, too quiet. Jake's pulse raced in his neck as he peered through the cracked window. The world seemed different now, darker, as though something had shifted. The air felt thicker, weighed down by an impending storm. His grip on the doorframe tightened, fingers pressing into the wood as he glanced over at Zira, who was preparing something, a map, or maybe it was a chart, written in symbols he didn't understand. "We don't have much time," she said quietly, her voice urgent but controlled. There was a sense of finality in her words, as if every second counted. Jake didn't have to ask what she meant. The sound of distant engines, low and mechanical, rumbled in the background, growing louder with every passing moment. "Where are we going?" Jake asked, his voice tense. Zira didn't look up. She traced a finger over a spot on the map before speaking. "A safe house. A place where they won't think to look. It's the only option left." Jake nodded, though the idea of a safe house felt like a faint hope. He didn't know what to expect, didn't even know if he could trust it. But right now, anything that offered a glimmer of safety was better than staying here. He turned back to the house, his thoughts racing. What if they couldn't make it? What if they were already too late? His eyes flicked toward the hallway, where Lily's bedroom door was still closed, the faint light from beneath it casting a soft glow. He couldn't keep her in the dark forever, but he couldn't tell her the truth. Not yet. Jake exhaled slowly, forcing himself to focus. They needed to move. The rumble in the distance was getting closer, and every instinct in his body screamed at him to leave now, to run. "You ready?" Zira's voice broke through his thoughts, calm and steady despite the chaos she was undoubtedly feeling inside. "I am," he said, though the uncertainty in his own voice startled him. He wasn't ready. He didn't know how to fight aliens, didn't know how to protect her or himself from the forces chasing them. But somehow, he had to. He glanced at Zira one more time, the woman who had changed everything for him. She was standing tall, her expression steely, as if nothing could break her focus. She had come from a world he couldn't even begin to understand, but now she was his only ally. In a world full of enemies, she was the one he had to trust. Jake grabbed his jacket and slung it over his shoulders, his eyes flicking toward the front door. "Let's go." They moved quickly, their footsteps silent against the wooden floor. As they stepped out into the cold night, the first drop of rain splashed against the pavement, a signal of the storm that was approaching both in the sky and in their lives. Whatever came next, Jake knew they couldn't turn back. The safe house, Zira said, was their only hope. But with every step they took toward it, Jake felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. The storm was just beginning, and it wasn't just the weather. It was everything that was coming for them, and it was far worse than he could have imagined.